You're listening to Breaking New Ground. In this podcast, we provide thought-provoking conversations for those looking to begin or advance their entrepreneurial real estate goals.
Together, we'll venture into the world of commercial real estate with entrepreneurs who challenge the status quo, building innovative paths with bold approaches.
We're your hosts. I'm John Pugh, a real estate developer and investor.
And I'm Rachel Walters, a real estate marketing expert. Throughout our episodes, we'll bring in real estate trailblazers, creating a space for inspiring conversations surrounding commercial real estate.
Pugh Management is proud to sponsor the podcast Breaking New Ground. Pugh Management is a premier developer for mixed-use, multifamily, and industrial properties. We love to develop places to live, work, and play. Pugh Management partners with family offices and institutional investors on projects in New England and Central Florida. Check us out online at pughmgmt.com. Today we have a powerhouse guest, Dylan Goren, the founder and CEO of Pillar. Dylan is transforming the way real estate teams source acquisitions using cutting-edge software and data analysis to move faster and smarter. Before launching Pillar, Dylan built software that touched billions of square feet of real estate, shaping the industry through his work at JLL, Building Engines, Co-Urbanize, and also WeWork. Now he's bringing the expertise to help investors and operators unlock hidden opportunities in the market. He's a proud Babson College alum and a St. Petersburg, Florida resident. Dylan is here to share his insights on the future of real estate, how technology is revolutionizing deal making, and what's next for the industry. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you so much, John and Rach, for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Absolutely. We're excited to have you here. So let's just dive right into it. One of the things that is, as a developer, investor myself, one of the things that is clearly a big challenge for anyone in our business is site selection and kind of some of the pain points in terms of site selection. I want to kind of hear kind of your perspective on site selection, how it's been done, and think about ways in which maybe hear a little bit more about ways in which your business is looking to solve some of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pillar, it's no secret, is helping out with the site selection problem. That's really where we got our start and what we've been expanding through. I think that really the problem that we saw and the reason that the market has been pulling us to go and help out with that problem is that there's still so much manual process in how it's involved today. And I think the thing that's interesting is that you combine the fact that this is a manual process where you have developers and analysts scouring through Google Maps, city GIS viewers, municipal code, third-party applications filtering through. And it's also an incredibly data-rich area and problem to solve. So what we noticed is that you've got this needle in a haystack problem that developers are trying to solve with brute force and an incredibly rich amount of growing information in the ecosystem that is really primed for computers to be using and not so much developers. So that is, I think, the problem that we noticed, and really that's the space that we've been growing in, is finding innovative ways to take advantage of all of the growing amount of data and information that's out there in a flexible way that's molded to each developer's strategy so that they're not just taking a cookie cutter approach using the same tool that everybody else has.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a developer, I guess one of the pain points I have is collecting that data, right? So you go and you say, okay, I'm interested in this 5-acre site where we think the price might be right given what's there in terms of the potential layout for a development. And then there's all the typical DD that you want to do, right? So you want to understand whether it's in a FEMA flood zone. You want to understand if there's historic impacts, implications. You want to understand if there's soil implications or issues, the environmental issues. Are these some of the pieces that you work with in terms of streamlining the process? How do you kind of bring that all together? What exactly is what does that look like?
Yeah. So yes to all the above. I would say basically anything short of actually submitting a soil test and going on site, walking it with your own 2 feet. If the information is online and you're checking it and you're Googling around and trying to find that answer there, we're building that in to a more streamlined process. So you mentioned floodplain, the size of the lot, the condition of it, that kind of thing, whether it's on market or off market. These are all things that are digitized today and things that we are basically building out blocks to go and automatically check and bring directly to developers to say, hey, here's something that has repeated your search process. We've gone across this whole market and found everything that looks interesting to you.
So you mentioned the manual versus automated kind of piece. There's been a lot of talk about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence in the last 12 to 18 months. That's really kind of become a meaningful topic, and there's challenges with that in terms of it's not it's not waving a magic wand that fixes everything. But that being said, I've spent a large part of my career gathering all this information we're talking about, right? In terms of just data on what's available, what data is available, what's the zoning, what are the zoning ordinances that are, that are governing that particular parcel, and all these pieces. Kind of, what kind of interface are you building? What kind of interface is it that does a lot of this heavy lifting, and what are some of the challenges that you're solving? Clearly, you're automating to save time. Is time the biggest piece, or are there other pain points that you're kind of addressing?
Yeah, I think time is a huge component of it, and ultimately because time is connected directly to the revenue that these development companies are generating. Your
Sure.
ability to swiftly move through deals, kill weak ones, and prioritize the ones that make sense is essentially your ability to go and keep the firm alive and make the next project happen. So I would say it's our stance. We're not interested in automation end to end just for the pure sense of automation. Really the role that we play and the role that we see technology playing going forward in the future is not to replace the expertise of the developer, but to extend it and to empower the expertise. So really that is different, I would say, for every single development firm that we work with.
Yeah.
And some folks have criteria that is far more programmatic, that we can make into a repeatable process that can really generate really impressive results. I would reference the case study that Pillar's got with Beechwood Holdings. If you check out our website, it's also mentioned inside of the thesis driven article about us.
Now, was that article? I was just thinking about this a minute ago. I read an article on automating the process end to end that they wrote. It was a month and a half ago, that a little while back, that thesis driven had created, that Brad had written. Were you featured in that article, or was it a different one?
No, although a lot of people do think that we were featured inside of it. It's funny, the association that some folks make. I did share that article out, and I think that it provoked a lot of thought from people that were in my network and more broadly.
Absolutely.
We had a separate article that we were featured in called, I think it was How Technology is Transforming Site Selection, something like that. So we were featured alongside Placer and Land Tech inside of that article.
Nice.
That's awesome. Dylan, I like what you said. I mean, there is so much data in commercial real estate, so that's not the issue, right? And it really has been, until recent years, a very manual process. It really was, let's hire more analysts, let's hire more interns, right? And to bring all this data together. So how are you working with changing this mindset, changing this workflow? The change from this is the way we've always done it. How are you working through that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I would describe a lot of the work it is that we are doing is almost helping with change management in the transition from how many analysts do I hire to go and get the next deal, into systems thinking, where you can start to form the types of questions like, show me all 10-acre parcels that can fit 300 units of garden multifamily near $1.65 rent per square foot comparable. For some developers, that comes very intuitively. For others, it takes a little bit of an adjustment to start thinking, how can I take the most advantage of systems as opposed to hiring and training new employees? So it's a really fun challenge to introduce, some of these newer concepts and start to see the way that the market and our customers are interacting with it. But transitioning into systems thinking and being more effective with the tools that are at your disposal is a huge part of how we are helping our customers.
Yeah, I assume that your system is also saving this information. Is that correct? Because I know there's a lot of inefficiencies of that intern left, that analyst left. Well, it's in their email, it's in their Excel. And then you go back and maybe you're not looking at the same deal twice, right? But you're looking in the same area, you're looking in the same asset class, you're looking through the same tax record. So does your system
might be looking at the same deal twice? Some deals come back. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting thread. So tell me a little bit more about kind of the question you're asking there, because it sounds like you're kind of talking about not only the value of bringing all of this information into one place to see, but also there's decisions that are made over time. And, how does your firm basically taking advantage of those decisions over time to say, did we leave a breadcrumb trail here and should we go back? Or, is that along the lines of some of what you're referring to?
Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'll say a little bit, but I'm sure John can give you much more details. But you're looking at a deal and you think, okay, it's this opportunity, it's this asset class. Maybe I'm never going to look in this community again. And you hire people, you go through Excel sheets, especially before Google Share and a lot of those, they did all of that research and you have all of the disparate information and data you're talking about. And then maybe a couple of years later, they're like, well, there's the, and it's not going to be the exact same information, but a lot of it is still helpful of what did we look at back then? And like, what were we looking at? And let's look at the trend. And so there's a lot of lost information in larger development organizations.
Yeah, I would just add to that, to your point. I think you're making a very important point, and it's that, and it comes full circle back to what Dylan just said, which is systems thinking, right? Real estate has not been a business that has had very much systems thinking applied to it in terms of its processes. And as a result, it's very much a relationship driven business. It's a one-off business. I know the lawyer that knows the code inside and out, and no one else knows that person very well. And we're paying him enough that he doesn't talk to other people. And as a result, we know we can build an extra 3 stories on the top of this building, and we can pay more for that site, and therefore we get the site, we make the money, the other group doesn't. I've actively seen that in person, and it's a competitive advantage for developers. But I've also seen the transition of when I worked on Wall Street, we saw the transition of kind of voice brokerage, which was individual one-to-one phone calls, taking in orders and executing orders, to programmatically electronic execution of orders. And the industry has totally transformed. Right? That was 20-something years ago when I worked there. And to some extent, I feel like that's part of what Dylan's participating in, is automating that process. Is that the right way to think of it, Dylan? Or?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's our stance. You mentioned kind of the transformation to programmatic trading in the financial industry. I think it's our belief that the way that these innovation arcs work is that basically one cutting edge firm takes the risk on the bleeding edge, figures out how to apply something like systems thinking in a not just for the sake of systems thinking, but in a way that is effective, that produces results and outcomes that are advantageous compared to the rest of the industry. And once someone like that becomes a front runner, it creates a snowball effect where the rest of the firms are kind of forced to keep up because the bar just got raised. And so we kind of see that's the direction that the industry is going. There's a lot of other tools that are helping to move it in that direction, but ultimately that's what we think that we're participating in. And I want to bring it back, and I want to touch on something, the initial point that you brought up, Rachel, about saving information and tracking it. So I want to say, I think that there's a dirty word in real estate when it comes to technology, and it's CRM. And I think that people have an allergy and either fall asleep or break out in hives when someone in technology comes to them and says, I just built a new CRM for real estate and for tracking your deals. And I think every single developer just glances over at their Outlook and Excel spreadsheet and says, I think I got a CRM right here.
My database, they say a lot.
100%. So, but what I want to say is that I think what you brought up is critical, because if you're making decisions over time, this is part of systems thinking. You need to be documenting and keeping track of this, not in a way that's painful, that requires manual data entry and adopting a new system, but in a way that is integrated into your workflows as you are making decisions and labeling things. It should be keeping track of it intelligently so that it can help you make smarter decisions in the future. And so one example that I can share about that from some of how Pillar helps, this isn't something that we have released publicly, but we're on breaking new ground. So let's break some new ground.
There we go.
Some of the experimentations that we've run, we do have the ability to basically quickly label deals as you're looking through them. So the ability to basically, it's like a green, red button, qualified, disqualified, do I like it or not? And we have some customers who leverage this very heavily and have gotten to the point where they have basically inputted hundreds or almost thousands of decisions about the deals it is that they are analyzing and saying whether they like it or not from a basic sniff test standpoint. So some of the interesting things that we've been experimenting with is basically once you've built up a repository of those decisions, you can apply things like machine learning classification models to say, look, Pillar has these 1,000 listings that you just went through, or these 1,000 parcels that you just went through and labeled. And we've enriched it with all of these other variables that we know that you have to consider. Things like the slope of the terrain, the floodplain, maybe information about the zoning, the time it's been on the market, whatever it is. All of that is alongside those decisions you've made hundreds of times. And computers are at the point where you can feed them information like that so it can start to forecast and say, hey, when another deal comes in that has a similar size, layout, topography, et cetera, I can tell you instantly, hey, this looks pretty similar to the stuff that you had said you liked before. Let me recommend this to you. That is, I think, we're in the very early stages of developing it. And I think that that's where the most promising results might be for the folks who really want to take the most advantage of programmatic thinking.
You just eliminated the analyst's job.
Yeah, thanks for the exclusive offer, Dylan. We love the exclusive. But
Very
what's so
interesting.
interesting too is I love this thinking because I've heard from so many developers, they hire MBAs, they hire analysts who all know how to do pro formas. But I've heard a lot of developers say, well, I want to teach somebody how we do it. And so that's literally what you're doing. You're saying, instead of teaching this new analyst that this is how conservative we are, this is our risk, this is, what we put into our pro formas, we're going to teach, this computer system what our decisions are. And so I feel like it may be hard for people to wrap their head around, but it is very parallel thinking.
Yeah. I think that's a
really
great
cool.
point, Rachel. Yeah, it's exciting. Very excited to see that, Dylan. There's so I've used CRM before, right? A CRM when I was in the sales account management role back on Wall Street in financial technology. Everyone hated the CRM. And so there's a company I'm just going to give a shout out. Productive.ai is a company that's building some software. I know some other groups are doing a similar thing, but it's a company I've invested in, and they're effectively listening to conversations like this, taking notes, and then dropping information like, oh, we're going to have an appointment to meet up at this site on, next week on the 10th of February. And Rachel, Dylan, and John are going to be there. And then we got 5 different, takeaways in terms of who's doing what and who they're assigned to. And then those tasks are automatically assigned, et cetera. But you kind of need to have that ability because so much of CRMs previously is so driven on whether you took notes or not, whether you sat in front of a screen and computer, data entry, which every salesperson hates to do, right? So it's but all that being said, once you have all that data, it's just such an amazing, powerful thing, and it's really going to accelerate the change in our industry, which is interesting. So is that functionality? Is there some type of kind of let's say programmable functionality, or not even programmable, but like customizable functionality, something you're building into your product, which allows for a database to be connected to what you're doing of whether it's, customer information or decision. Where are those decisions kind of stored? Are they stored within your own software today, or kind of where does that live?
Yeah, 100%. So, we have the flexibility to structure basically in whatever way the customer needs. We've got, if someone wants something that is more turnkey, we've got tools that we've built where you can log into a map application. It's got a little table built right into it. As you click through the different rows, it links to the different deals on the map, and then you can label that very simply. Again, disqualified, qualified, add some notes, whatever it is. I think, to the example of, the CRM that you had invested in, John, what we kind of say internally is that we really want to be, lightweight. We want it to be invisible during the process. And I think that that's kind of the philosophy you have to take if you want to see adoption.
Sure.
Everyone dreads the process of adding another 30 minutes to each half of their day, entering in notes, trying to remember, oh, I forgot to do it for this one or that one. So we kind of joke internally that we want people to sneeze and fall into a CRM while they're using something like Pillar. So in some cases, we've got a tool that you can use that's built in and super simple. In other cases, we can plug in if you've got Excel spreadsheets or information you're keeping in other places. It's just as easy for us to go and plug into that and include that inside of our system.
Cool. Very interesting. So there's a topic here that we wanted to discuss with you, zoning, kind of zoning, and I think it was a statement that you had made to me in an email that kind of zoning has stopped mattering as much. What exactly, what does that mean? How does that play into things here?
Yeah, so I'll give a bit of a hot take here, but it might not be so much of a hot take actually as we get into it. The reason that I think I made that statement is actually originally Pillar had started with processing basically every letter of zoning code and future land use code, municipality by municipality for our customers. And the reason that we did that is we heard from customers that I got to have zoning information. It's so important. I got to know what's the density, what's the FAR, how many units per acre can I fit, what's the height. It takes me so long to read through the municipal code and the future land use. If you could just do that for me and show me the stuff that is future land use, multifamily, that's all I need. So we got our start there. And what we found is that actually after we did that across, I don't know, maybe 10 to 20 different municipalities, we had processed millions of parcels through applying the zoning code scientifically to it. And what we found is that there weren't that many deals. There weren't that many results inside of it. And I think that, a lot of developers will find this to be true, but most of the folks that we're talking with, particularly in the multifamily space, you're going through rezoning and entitlements on 95% of your projects. So, everybody wants the zoning information. It's so critical, but the reality is the way that the market works is that the zoning isn't always dictating exactly what's getting built there. It's a relationship between the developer, the community, the zoning, and the planning board to define and weave a story about, hey, this is the arc of growth for this area. This is what the letter of the law says today about what we can build, but this is what has been approved elsewhere in this area that has done very well for the community and how we see the future of responsibly growing and building this area out. So, I had a really smart developer who I was meeting with in his Atlanta office one day, who I asked for some advice, on what would you advise me to focus on in building out Pillar. And he paused, he didn't know what to say for a little while. And then later in the conversation, he interrupted me and said, I know what you need to focus on. He goes, you need to focus on the story behind these development projects, because every single development project at the end of the day, we're using all of these different data points to weave a narrative, bring it to an investment committee and say, this is why this makes sense. And then we're doing the same thing with pitching this into the planning department, et cetera. So the reason that I say zoning doesn't matter is we've paid attention to zoning as a source of ground truth, and it doesn't provide typically, I think there are some exceptions to this, but broad spectrum, what we've seen is it's not pointing to you to where the next deals are. You have to be a little bit more creative than that, which I think most developers know to be true.
Yeah. That's such a great point, Dylan. And I just want to point out that you are a very thoughtful tech founder. And I just remembered why I did this introduction is I think you asked me, what do you think someone needs more of? And I gave you an honest answer and, not an ego answer. I said, I think you really need someone who's boots on the ground doing it. What I can give you a marketing perspective, and I think that's when I introduced you to John. And I love that you took the time and listened. And a lot of founders don't. They say, this is what I'm building. This is what you need. And here you go. So congrats to you for, going to these conversations and looking for what is actually needed in the market.
Yeah, that's unusual. I agree. I think it's a great feather in your cap for sure, Dylan. I think most people think they have the right answer and then they go trying to force the answer on everyone as opposed to listening. And I would 100% agree with what you just said. And that developer gave you good advice. If you're building a deal of any particular size, you're likely going to have to rezone. And then it comes back to what are your relationships with the community and how do you tell the story such that it clearly articulates why it's going to be beneficial for that particular development to be there? And I think any developer who's worth his or her salt knows how to do that. But they need help. They need assistance. They need to understand what type of risks they're taking before they get knee deep in the deal, right? So I think that's a great That's great perspective. Can you maybe speak to how Pillar supports some of those, some of that storytelling, that narrative? Because I think when you and I looked at this product, excuse me, when you were first kind of building it out a while back, it was focused on the zoning code and what was in there, and I think I'm curious to hear how it's developed.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because I'm thinking back to us sitting inside of Intermezzo, and I think I showed you a complete piece of junk that wasn't even working when we were sitting there. It was supposed to be looking up. I think at that point we were working on like the permitting process and trying to count parking requirements based on project size. And I distinctly remember trying to look up and show John, who I was meeting for the first time, who I had just been kindly introduced to, hey, here's how my software counts parking spots. And it was just hanging, stalling. And I go, well, it does work, but I'll show you some other time.
I've been in that position before, presenting tech that doesn't work, so I get it. No big deal.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong for sure. Yeah, so I think I can speak kind of toward how Pillar is supporting this narrative or this storytelling process around these projects if helpful.
Yeah.
So I think one of the adaptations that we made that has landed really, really well with the folks we've worked with is after we had that insight about, hey, zoning is actually not ground truth for most of these projects. Really what these people are looking at actually is they're trying to look at comparables is a big piece of it. So, if I'm going and I'm trying to build an institutional multifamily project, I'm looking around and saying, where are the other 150 plus unit multifamily buildings in this market that are achieving the rent levels that I need, that maybe have been built within a certain year. And almost everybody that we talked to was using those to underwrite their deals, even though they weren't requesting us directly to go and find that information and make sure that they had that alongside the sites we were recommending. I don't think they connected that those two things were part of the same process in terms of finding sites. So some of what we shifted to doing that we found was actually far more scalable, more efficient from a systems thinking standpoint. We can go and plot all of the comparables across an entire state or an entire region, across the whole Southeast far more efficiently than we can going and analyzing the municipal code across the thousands of different municipalities that are in those areas. And so what we ended up doing that landed with our customers and helped to weave the story is we would go and say, hey, let's find all of the sites that are qualified that are within 3 miles of a rent comparable that you need to underwrite the deal. And it doesn't matter if, what the zoning is so much. Of course, it'd be great if you could build all 150 units as of right. But what matters a lot more is that even if it's not, now that every single deal that Pillar is recommending to you, you can go, one, underwrite it based on the rents it is that you need, so that the deal pencils much more confidently. And two, if you do get to that point where you start looking at LOIs and putting it under contract and talking with the city about entitlements, now you can point and say, look, there's a recently built multifamily building right there. It's fully leased up. It's doing fantastic. The residents love it. And now, we want to go and help add to the supply in this community so more people can have housing that want to live in this wonderful area.
So yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think that's like, to me, you've done enough homework to, as a person I don't think you've really done any actual development yourself. Have you done development yourself, Dylan?
I haven't had the privilege. No, I've worked alongside developers in different capacities, but
the privilege of the pain, right? Yeah. But no, I think you kind of hit on one of the biggest pain points, and that's absolutely the way developers figure it out, right? If you've seen that there's been multiple approvals for a particular project type in a particular area, and you like that area, you go and you dig out. These are the different projects and where they are, and you think through kind of the pieces that connect them to your parcel and why, and then if it makes sense, then you go ahead with it. If it doesn't, if maybe, but then you go have conversations with people who are stakeholders in the community to understand kind of their needs, and all that kind of forms. It's funny because people always, whenever you talk to people about being a real estate developer, as a real estate developer, people never really understand what you do. They're like, what do you do? Like, and that's a big piece of it, is really speaking with people, understanding the landscape, the ground that you're actually in, and what you're dealing with, and making a risk reward decision based off of, is this going to potentially get approved? Because so much of what we do as developers is identifying opportunities, but not just identifying them and understanding whether the outcome is likely enough to want to invest your time, money, and blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, and that's like 90% of it. I think most people don't really have that perspective, and I think certainly people who accuse developers of being the bad guys or this, that, and the other, they don't really understand. And yeah, sure, there's definitely a lot of people in the industry that maybe are big egos and they got a lot of money to throw around. They make a bad name for themselves. So definitely I don't question that. But there's definitely a lot of people that are just trying to do good things that'll fit in with the community, that are going to add value to the community. And I think you can only do that by understanding that narrative, by understanding some of those different pieces. And it is data, right? Like, it is data. It's public data. And to my understanding, no one's really found a way to quantify it and capture it in a way that's reusable for customers at this point. And so, that's great. I'm excited about this. So, open data and CRE, this all comes back to kind of that idea, right? This proliferation of open data and CRE. Kind of how have you seen that evolve? I mean, you've been doing this for a year and a half, 2 years. How long have you been doing this for now? How have you seen it evolve since you started even?
Yeah, 1 year in, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that this is the exact topic that I wanted to touch on as an extension of all of this. I think that real estate, and particularly technology, has been in a really interesting place over the last 20, 30 years, where technology providers have largely taken a closed ecosystem approach. If you look at the biggest incumbents in the space, they've all kind of built up walled gardens. They had a land grab, and they've built tremendous businesses on the backs of providing information in a closed ecosystem to a lot of these companies. And I think that there's probably always going to be some place for exchanging information in a closed ecosystem. But I think that there are a couple of early signals that I think are really interesting to pay attention to, that kind of suggest a bit of a shift away from that. Number one, most of the information that's happening inside of these closed ecosystems already, 90% of this is public information, right? Like, nobody owns the parcel boundaries, nobody owns who the owner of that place is, the acreage on it, whether it's on market or off market. This is not something that is proprietary. This is something that is open to the market to see and identify. Sure, there are exceptions, maybe where somebody's got a pocket listing or something like that, but broadly, people are trying to market this information and share it. And in many cases, it's owned by the government or the people of the United States. So I think that what's really interesting is that, number one, there are lots of providers that are popping up now, especially with what's happening with LLMs. I'd call out providers like Hello Data, who's doing this with public data for rent comparables, Resimplify, who's doing this with listing information that's public and aggregating it into one place to be easily accessible. Regrid, who's our partner, is doing this with parcel information and geospatial information. All of these different providers. Shovels is another great one that I'll call out, who's doing this with construction permits. That's super insightful nationwide. All of these providers are popping up left and right. They're creating a very, very rich ecosystem. And I think that if you look at how other technology industries have developed successfully, you look at your HubSpots, your Salesforces, your Zendesks, who have created these open ecosystems for innovators, developers. In this case, I'm talking about software developers, to interface with the technology and build a richer ecosystem of point solutions for all of these different cracks and crevices. And so I think that we are seeing the proliferation of that inside of the real estate data space. And what that means is that it's easier than ever to go out and fetch a lot of the information that previously you said I had to log into one platform to go and find it, or maybe I had to go and look across all of these different annoying public data sources to try and consolidate it myself. The last thing I'll say about this, because there's one other piece that I think makes this even more interesting, and that's that there's active litigation and legal precedent that's making this a different landscape. So, I would point to some of the litigation from the Department of Justice on the information that was getting shared around with RealPage. I believe that case ultimately got dropped.
RealPage, yeah.
Yep. Ultimately, I think that case got dropped. But, from everything that I can tell from chatting with folks who are close to this case, it's enough to scare a lot of the developers, real estate operators and owners to say, look, this isn't really worth the risk. If we get caught up in a price fixing litigation lawsuit, even if it gets dropped at the end of the day, this is a massive risk for us to be taking on. Plus, this information all is either largely public or we're aggregating it ourselves internally from our own portfolio. And so I think that is also creating a motivation and a sense of urgency to move toward that type of adoption of open data. So that is, I think, an interesting kind of ground shift that we see happening in the landscape that we're ultimately trying to position ourselves to plug into and play nicely with.
So that's really interesting. I would point to, again, the kind of Wall Street and, the availability of real-time quotes, in real-time just information, data, news that was, it was on Bloomberg Terminal, which charges you an exorbitant amount of money to have access to. And you had internal systems that were built that would provide that information for people. But if you were just, Johnny Smith from down the street, you couldn't have access to that information. Therefore, you couldn't in real time invest in a deal with any real confidence that you were going to buy it at the price. All you had was the Wall Street Journal quote, right? This is 30 years ago, whatever. And now you go on Yahoo Finance and all the information is pretty much available. It's free. They're obviously charging some advertisers, but you're not getting charged to see that information. Is that kind of the transformation you're describing to some extent?
Yeah, I think that there's a parallel there. I think I'm probably less familiar with the ins and outs of kind of Bloomberg versus Yahoo Finance and the roles that those are playing in the financial industry. And I guess what I would build on top of that and say is that Bloomberg's probably an example of there's probably always some space for a closed ecosystem provider to offer
Sure.
one unique service for this. But I think that
So what I'm saying there is basically if you wanted to understand the price to earnings ratio for a company, you might not have that information readily available. But now it's on Yahoo Finance, you pick it up like that, right? But if you're talking about rents, multifamily rents in a particular submarket in the Boston market, unless you pay for a subscription to CoStar, you're not going to have a full picture of unless you call every one of those multifamilies and you gather that data yourself, et cetera, right? So is that kind of what you're talking about, is really having that kind of additional insight that is allowed by this open data kind of situation?
Yep. Yeah. I think, my view on the space is that basically a lot of those criteria that, are viewed as proprietary today, and hey, there's only one single place that I can log into to get this information. There are an increasing number of other providers who are offering those same or equivalent insights in different areas. And so I think that the value in the future in a space where you see a lot of different providers offering those same insights and access to them at an affordable cost, the thing that becomes important is your ability to work fluently with all of that information. And how are you picking and choosing the right pieces and providers that you're working with? How are you combining them in a way that is proprietary to you so that you can deploy your investment thesis at scale or more effectively and efficiently? That, I think, is ultimately the backbone of what we are trying to build out with Pillar, is that we see this data proliferating all over the place. And we see, the need for a lot of these developers over time to become more fluent in working with that information. And I think that that's a big gap it is that we're really trying to close.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and is a really great point. Also, I want to talk to you along the industry lines of technology. How are you seeing now, as a founder selling to commercial real estate, is there a tech fatigue? Do you think there's a misalignment? What is some of the, reluctance to look at new technology?
Yeah. I think, real estate and in almost every other industry, there's been so much proliferation of technology over the last 20 years. And in many ways, it's been absolutely incredible. But, on another axis, it's been absolutely overwhelming. And there's 20 different tools that all do flavors of the same thing. And how do I make sense of it? What do I actually need to use? So yeah, I think fatigue is a huge topic that I share a lot about on LinkedIn. I share a lot of stories, from conversations with folks about this. And I think that really, the other opinion that we have on the market at Pillar is that the products and the companies that are simplifying that sense of overwhelm, that are consolidating your stack down into something that is easier to deal with, those are the companies that are going to win, that the market is going to demand over time. And I would point to ChatGPT and all of these different AI chatbots, but ChatGPT in particular as the shining example of this. You look at, I forget the exact number on it, but some million number of active users acquired in 2 months. fastest adoption of any product in history, as far as I understand. And the way that I chalk that up is you look at what you had to do previously before ChatGPT, Google, YouTube, using a calculator app or tool, taking notes, whatever it is. And all of a sudden you've got one place that intelligently handles all of it. And I think that people felt a sigh of relief and also, a sense of excitement of, wow, I can do so much now that I'm not bogged down by 30 different tools. So I think that creating that same sense of relief and excitement, that's the direction that the winners, in technology are going to play going forward.
Yeah. Do you see any misalignment with the different industries, with commercial real estate versus tech, or maybe traditional tech or VC?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely real estate is unique in terms of adopting technology, and I think that's been the case for a very long time. And I don't think anyone has quite been able to put their finger on exactly why. But I think, John, you had mentioned, relationships industry. Every industry is a relationships industry, but real estate in particular, I think, takes that to the extreme.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people might point to the relationships, the hyper locality of real estate. It's all about knowing that one vacant parcel that's in that back lot, next to the warehouse that, is an up and coming area with, young families moving into. So I think that there's, a shape to the real estate industry and the way that people operate in it that has insulated it from adopting a lot of the accelerated creation of technology over the last 20 years. Venture funding's played a big piece in that. Obviously, when millions of dollars are flooded into the market, people are going to go and build lots of new stuff in a hurry. But yeah, I think that what's changing, what I will say that I have seen that's changing is that I think we're starting to see new generations of leadership inside of the real estate industry. So there are folks who graduated college 5-6 years ago, around the same time that I did, who have risen their way up through the ranks, have worked really hard, and now are starting to be put into decision-making seats as directors, VPs, and they take a look and they're taking inventory of the way that the process works today, and they're thinking about how they use technology in their day-to-day lives, how they're going and finding a movie on Netflix, how they're going and buying their products on Amazon, the level of convenience and the level of efficiency that offers. And I think a lot of people, it's second nature to think there's got to be a better way to do some of how we're doing real estate today. And so I think that there is an exciting tipping point that is coming as a result of that, where a lot of the younger generation who's starting to get a louder voice in the space, they are playing this role where they are able to help bring the technology industry into the fold and communicate more clearly with technology founders like myself. This is what it is that we're looking for, from a technology standpoint. So I think that gap is closing, but historically there's been a really wide divide, I think, before.
Well, and I think, when I first started in the industry, I remember hearing the old graybeard, discussion. They're the ones who make the decisions. The guys and gals with the gray hair, and I don't think that that's changed that much. I do believe that we're in a place where we have just basically people my generation and younger. Like, I grew up with a computer, right? Like, it was not a new thing. So like if you go back the previous generation, my father's generation, computers were not available as children, right? And so, like, I think people have been making decisions, have been baby boomers, and for the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, 20 years, and before the previous generation. And older generations are always going to be making decisions, whether it's investments or technology. And I think because of our generation has kind of come up with computers and very much has been computer literate, that, like, when I first started in the industry, it was, I guess if you count all the way back, it was, 20 years ago. And I remember going to, my first day, and I was told to go in the back in the plan room. And there's all these plans, these giant drawings that were actual blueprints that someone had drawn by hand. And if you wanted to look up a particular building and understand what was going on with that building, this is on a college campus in Massachusetts, you had to go through and piece through all the pages. And and I had just come from Wall Street, where they were starting this programmatic trading transformation. And but that comes from the generations. Who's making decisions? What's the most, what's valued, what's held in most esteem, et cetera. And so I think it's exciting. It's like you said, it's a very exciting time, and we're excited to be a part of it with you.
Yeah, we love this tipping point, and we're very optimistic, and we're all tech champions. So I'm glad you made that point, Dylan, at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So Dylan, as we're wrapping up, would love to allow for our audience to connect with you, and what's the best way to do that? Follow along with what you're doing at Pillar. Tell us more about that.
For sure. Yeah, best way to keep in touch, find me on LinkedIn, Dylan Goren, DYLAN-GOREN. You can check out our website, pillar.codes, if you want to see more, book a time with me to get in touch and understand some more about what we're doing. And then the website links to kind of all of the good press that we're getting shared in, like what you guys are doing here, and then the thesis-driven article covering us. So feel free to check all of that out there.
All right. We'll make sure it's all in the show notes.
Thanks so much,
Dylan.
guys. This is awesome.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
We want to hear your thoughts and feedback on today's episode and what topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes.
Follow us on Spotify to be notified when our next episode is live. To connect with John and I, follow us on LinkedIn.
Thanks for joining us today on Breaking New Ground.